On the 19th of November 1942, the German Sixth Army was winning. It held 9/10 of Stalingrad. 5 days later, 290,000 of its men were sealed inside a ring they could not break. The blow that trapped them never touched the city. It landed 60 miles away against men that most accounts forget were even there. This is exactly how an army that was winning was destroyed in 5 days. You already know this battle. A sniper in the rubble. A rifle scope catching the light. 2 marksmen hunting each other through a dead city. And the fate of a war decided by a single shot. That duel almost certainly never happened. No German record of the sniper exists. Historians who went looking found no such man, no such sniper school, and no date for the death that supposedly changed everything. Vasily Zaitsev himself was entirely real. A shepherd's son from the Urals, credited with 225 confirmed kills, and made a hero of the Soviet Union. It is the duel that is the invention. The historian Antony Beevor, after years in the Soviet Defense Archives, called the whole story a clever figment of propaganda. But the myth is worth keeping, because it tells you exactly where everyone was looking. At the rubble, at the snipers, at the city. And that is precisely where this battle was not decided. Stalingrad was a long ribbon of factories and workers housing on the west bank of the Volga, and it carried Stalin's name. Hitler wanted it. By late August, the German Sixth Army had reached its edge. On the 23rd of August, the Luftwaffe came in force. The bombers reduced most of the city to rubble in a matter of days. And in burning it, they built the one thing the German army would come to regret most: cover. Rubble does not surrender. A standing building can be surrounded and taken. A collapsed one is 1,000 firing positions stacked on top of each other, and it swallowed the German advantage whole. The Sixth Army was no ordinary formation. It had marched through Belgium, through France, and deep into the Soviet Union. Many called it the finest field army Germany ever fielded. Nothing had halted it yet. Stalin's answer had already been written. Order number 227, issued that July, needed no interpretation. Not one step back. Behind the 62nd Army lay a wide, freezing river. There was no plan for retreat, because retreat was not permitted. The man who understood that first was Vasily Chuikov. Blunt, stubborn, and newly handed the 62nd Army. He was given a city he was widely expected to lose. Zhukov's answer was to refuse the distance. He ordered his men to hold their lines so close to the Germans that the two armies were often 50 meters apart. He called it hugging the enemy. It was not bravado. It was arithmetic. German air power was the finest in the world, and it could not be used on a line pressed up against its own troops. Every bomb dropped on the front line risked killing Germans, so the sky went quiet over the front, and the battle shrank to the size of a room. Men fought down staircases and through cellar walls. The Germans gave it a name: Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. They measured their gains in yards. A grain elevator on the southern edge held out for days. A single apartment block, later remembered as Pavlov's house, was held for 2 months by a handful of men. Behind Chuikov ran the Volga, wide and freezing. Every bullet, every loaf of bread, every replacement crossed it under fire. Soviet losses in the city ran to more than 2,000 men a day. Then, in November, the river turned against them as well. The Volga filled with drifting ice, too thick to row through, and too thin to carry a man's weight. For weeks the crossings very nearly stopped. The men holding the city were, in every practical sense, alone. Around 500,000 civilians were still inside the city when the German advance reached it. Stalin had refused to allow an evacuation. They sheltered in cellars and drainage pipes beneath a battlefield. And still the Germans came on. Through September, through October, into November, they took the tractor works, the gun factory, the steel plant. Yard by yard, at a price no army could pay forever, they were winning. By the middle of November, the Sixth Army held roughly 9/10 of Stalingrad. Chuikov's army was pinned against the river on strips of ground a few hundred yards deep. On any map in Berlin that looked like victory, 10% left. One more push. It was the most expensive optical illusion in military history, because a question that nobody in Berlin was asking already had an answer, and the answer was moving. If the Sixth Army was inside the city, then who exactly was holding the ground outside it? 2 men had asked it. On the 12th of September in Moscow, Georgy Zhukov and Aleksandr Vasilevsky stood over a map while Stalin studied the German advance. They were meant to be planning yet another attack into the city's edge. Instead, the 2 generals spoke quietly to each other about looking for another solution. Stalin heard them and demanded to know what they meant. Their argument was simple, and it was about geography rather than courage. The German summer offensive had reached for the Caucasus oil fields and for Stalingrad at the same time. It had stretched the front line to a length that no army on earth could actually hold. The German command knew it. They simply had nothing left to hold it with. So the flanks of the Sixth Army, hundreds of miles of open steppe, were handed to somebody else. To the north stood the Romanian Third Army. To the south, the Romanian Fourth. Allies dug into frozen ground, holding the shoulders of the entire German position in Russia. They were brave enough. They were also short of very nearly everything that stops a tank. Their anti-tank guns could not reliably stop a Soviet T-34, and every man on that line knew it. The Romanians said so out loud. Their commanders warned that the flank was thin and that the guns were wrong. The warnings traveled up the chain of command, and there they stopped. And here is the part that should trouble anyone who believes that disasters are caused by blindness. German intelligence saw it coming. Foreign Armies East, the German Army's Eastern Intelligence Branch under Reinhard Gehlen, tracked the Soviet buildup through the autumn. On the 12th of November, it issued a warning. An attack was coming, and it would fall on the Romanian Third Army. They were right. They were also catastrophically wrong about what it was. Gehlen's staff read the coming blow as a limited operation, a cut across the salient to sever the railway and force the Germans to give up the city. Not an envelopment, not a trap. Something small, something local, something survivable. Gehlen also believed the true Soviet offensive would land hundreds of miles to the north against Army Group Center. And when the Romanians raised the alarm again, they were told not to worry. The Russians, they were assured, were already stretched to their limit. They were not blind. They looked directly at it, and they saw something smaller. The Red Army helped them believe it. Movement only at night, radio silence, and whole armies buried under snow and netting by day. Zhukov and Vasilevsky did not plan to break into Stalingrad at all. They planned to go around it, through the Romanians, and then shut the door behind an entire German army. And the city itself. Historians have argued ever since that Stalingrad's defenders were kept deliberately thin. Chuikov was sent enough to survive, and never quite enough to win. Enough to hold. Enough to keep the Sixth Army chewing at the rubble, month after month, while across the river, out of sight, the Red Army was quietly assembling over 1 million men, over 1 million soldiers, 13,000 guns and mortars, nearly 900 tanks, moved at night, hidden under snow and netting by day, into positions the German command regarded as a quiet sector. They called it Operation Uranus. It was set for the 19th of November, and its first target was not a German at all. At 7:20 on the morning of the 19th, the fog over the Don steppe is so thick that the gunners cannot see their targets. They fire anyway. Thousands of guns and mortars open at once. For 80 minutes, the Romanian positions disappear beneath it. Then the guns stop, and the fog fills with the sound of engines. The T-34s come through the mist with infantry riding on their hulls. The Romanian gunners fire, and they watch their shells fail. There is nothing on that line that can stop what is coming out of the fog. The Romanians hold for a single day. That is not a criticism of them. Ask any army to stop a tank with a gun that cannot pierce it. The result is the same everywhere. By the end of the 20th of November, the Third Army is in headlong retreat. The southern pincer opens that same morning and finds exactly the same result. The steppe behind the German army is wide open. And in the city, the German divisions, the veterans, the men who won the rubble, are facing entirely the wrong way. Their war is 100 yards wide. The one that decides them is 100 miles. On the 23rd of November, near a town called Kalach, the northern and southern spearheads meet. The door closes. 290,000 men are inside it. 5 days. That is how long it took to destroy an army that had spent 5 months winning, and not one of those 5 days was fought in the streets they had bled for. Inside the ring, the Sixth Army was still a dangerous force. It had tanks, artillery, and veteran infantry. On the 23rd of November, Paulus asked for permission to break out to the west. Friedrich Paulus was the perfect staff officer. Precise, careful, dutiful, a man who had built an entire career on doing exactly what the plan said. The order came back from Berlin. Stand fast, because a promise had already been made. The Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring assured Hitler, would supply the trapped army entirely from the air. 500 tons a day. He had not checked with the men who would have to fly it. The Sixth Army needed at least 300 tons a day simply to keep existing. Across the 71 days of the airlift, it received an average of 117, 8,000 tons in total, flown into shrinking airstrips through Soviet fighters and winter fog. By the end, it was 60 tons on a good day. The army began to starve. On the 12th of December, Erich von Manstein tried to punch a corridor through to them from the southwest. his panzers fought to within 30 miles of the pocket. 30 miles. Paulus had perhaps 100 running tanks, and fuel enough to move them about 20. He also had a direct order forbidding retreat, and he had never in his life disobeyed one. And while Paulus waited, the Red Army opened a second offensive. On the 16th of December, it struck the middle dawn against the Italian 8th Army. It tore 20 miles through them on the first day. Manstein now had to save his own flank, and the panzers meant for Stalingrad turned to face it. On Christmas Eve, Soviet tanks overran the airfield at Tatsinskaya. It was one of the two fields the airlift flew from. The rescue and the lifeline died in the same week. He did not move. By the end of December, Manstein's relief force was falling back, and the corridor closed for good. It was the last time that anyone came for them. People often say that the Russian winter beat the Germans at Stalingrad. The ring closed in November, before the worst of the cold arrived. The winter did not trap the 6th Army. It only decided the manner of its death. Inside the pocket, the daily bread ration fell to a few ounces. Men froze at their posts. The wounded lay in cellars without heat, while the airstrips were overrun one after another. On the 30th of January, 1943, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal. It was not a reward. No German field marshal had ever surrendered, and Paulus understood precisely what he was being told to do. He declined the hint. The following day, the 31st of January, he surrendered. On the 2nd of February, the last pocket gave up, and 91,000 men walked out into the snow. They had taken 9/10ths of a city. They had held it for 5 months. Of the men captured in the ruins of it, fewer than 6,000 ever saw Germany again. Some of them did not come home for another 13 years. Germany declared 3 days of national mourning. It was the first time the Nazi state had ever admitted losing. Paulus himself survived. He was released in 1953 and lived out his life in East Germany, a field marshal who had commanded an army that no longer existed. Stalingrad is remembered as the fight in the rubble, but the rubble is where the Germans won. The battle was lost on open ground behind them, on a flank that nobody was watching, in 5 days in November. Every army that has ever been beaten was beaten the same way, not where it was looking. If the battles that turned history are worth your time, subscribe and march with us for the next one.